The login screen loaded slowly that morning. I remember watching the little circle spin. I had checked this account maybe 100 times before. Always the same number sitting there. Steady. Safe. Then the page finished loading. $224,000. Gone. Not moved. Not transferred somewhere I recognized. Not a bank error with a note attached. Just gone. Like it had never been there. I sat very still. The coffee beside me went cold. I didn't move for a long time. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was 22 years old, one semester away from finishing my degree in civil engineering, and that account had been sitting there since I was 4 years old. My grandmother started it. She told me once, quietly, during a Sunday dinner when everyone else was talking, that she wanted to make sure I had something no one could take from me. She had worked her whole life. She understood what it meant to build something slowly. She put in contributions every year. My parents were listed as co-trustees. I was supposed to gain full control at 25. That was the plan. I came from a family that looked fine from the outside. 2-story house. Good neighborhood. My parents were presentable people, the kind who remembered to send thank you cards and shook hands firmly. My older brother Marcus had always been the center of things. Not in a cruel way, not at first. He was just louder. More charming. He filled the room and my parents let him. His wedding had been the topic of conversation for almost a year. His fiancée came from a wealthy family, and my parents were very aware of that. They wanted the wedding to reflect something. I wasn't sure what. Status, maybe. A version of themselves they believed in. I didn't think much of it. It wasn't my wedding. But then small things started to feel strange. My mother stopped asking about my classes. That was unusual. She had always asked, too much, even, in that way parents do when they want to feel involved. Then she stopped completely. Not gradually. Just stopped. My father started leaving the room when I came in. Not obviously. He would find a reason, a phone call, something he forgot upstairs. But it was consistent enough that I noticed. One evening I mentioned, casually, that I was looking into internships for after graduation. My mother smiled. It was the right shape of a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said, "You're so resourceful. You'll figure it out." That was a strange thing to say. I let it sit. I didn't push. I told myself I was reading into things, being paranoid, putting pressure on myself because finals were coming. Then my brother's fiancée made a comment at dinner. She didn't mean it as a confession. She probably thought I already knew. She reached across the table for the bread and said, almost as a side note, "The venue your parents booked, that place is expensive." They really went all out. My mother changed the subject immediately. My father looked at his plate. I looked at both of them. Something passed between them, a look, a fraction of a second, and then it was gone. I went home that night and I sat with it. I turned it over. I thought about the account. I thought about how my parents had always handled the paperwork. I thought about the fact that I had never been given full access, just the ability to view the balance. They had told me that was standard for a trust. I had believed them. I called the bank the next morning from my car, parked outside my apartment, windows up. The representative confirmed the balance. Or rather, confirmed the absence of one. I asked when the withdrawals had occurred. She gave me a range. 10 months. 17 separate transactions. All authorized by the co-trustees. I thanked her and ended the call. I didn't cry. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my brother. I understood in that moment that whatever I did next would determine everything. If I reacted, I would lose. I would become the emotional one, the ungrateful one, the one who ruined the wedding, the one making things about money when family was supposed to matter more. I had seen how my family handled conflict. They reframed it. They redirected it. My mother was very good at making the person raising a concern feel like the problem. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. I gave myself 3 days. Not to grieve. Not to panic. 3 days to understand exactly what had been done, and how completely. I started with the bank. I went in person this time, dressed carefully, spoke quietly, brought my ID and every document I had ever received connected to that account. The kind of visit where you don't give anyone a reason to dismiss you. The account manager was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s. She pulled up the records without much ceremony. I asked her to print everything. Every transaction. Every authorization signature. Every date. She slid the papers across the desk. 17 withdrawals. Beginning 11 months ago. The first one was $18,000. The last one, 2 weeks before my login screen showed me nothing, $31,500. All signed off by both co-trustees. Both of my parents. I folded the papers carefully, thanked her, walked to my car, sat for a moment. Then I drove home and scanned every single page. The bank records were one thing. They told me the what and the when. I needed the where. I wasn't living at home, but I still had a key. My parents both worked until 6. Marcus had his own apartment across town. I went on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't there to take anything. I wasn't there to confront anyone. I was there because my mother kept files. She had always been organized in that particular way, paper trails for everything, labeled folders in the cabinet beside my father's desk. She believed in documentation. That habit, as it turned out, worked against her. The cabinet wasn't locked. Inside the third folder, a venue contract. A catering agreement. A florist invoice. A hotel room block confirmation for 74 guests. Every payment was traced back to a single account. Mine. The venue alone, $87,000. The catering, $44,000. The hotel block, $29,000. There were smaller amounts scattered through, flowers, a live band, custom invitations, a videographer package described as cinematic. A honeymoon deposit to a resort in the Maldives. I photographed every page. Both sides. I didn't move anything. I left the cabinet exactly as I found it. I locked the front door behind me and I drove away. That evening, I sat with everything spread in front of me. Bank records on one side. Photographs of the contracts on the other. The math was exact. $224,000 withdrawn. $221,400 accounted for in vendor contracts, all under my brother's wedding. They had not been sloppy about it. This wasn't impulsive. The withdrawals were spaced out, never 2 in the same week, never a round number that might flag something. Someone had thought about this. Someone had planned it carefully over nearly a year. I thought about my grandmother. About the Sunday dinners. About what she said, something no one can take from you. They had taken it. Slowly. Methodically. While I was in class, studying for exams, building toward a future they were quietly dismantling behind me. I needed to know one more thing. I needed to know if my grandmother knew. I called her that night. Kept my voice even. Told her I was doing well, that school was fine, that I was looking forward to the wedding. I let her talk. She loved to talk. Then I asked, gently, whether she had heard anything about the trust fund recently. Any updates, any changes she'd been informed of. There was a pause. She said, "No, sweetheart." "Why? Is everything all right?" I told her everything was fine. I told her I was just doing some planning for after graduation. She accepted that. We talked for a few more minutes and said goodnight. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time. My grandmother did not know. She had built that account for 22 years. She had contributed to it faithfully. She believed it was sitting there, intact, waiting for me. And my parents had never told her. They had moved the money, paid for a wedding, and said nothing. They were planning to sit at that wedding, in that $87,000 venue, eating that $44,000 catering, and smile across the table at the woman who had funded all of it without knowing. That was the moment I understood the full shape of what had happened. It wasn't just about the money. They had deceived my grandmother. They had used her love for me as the vehicle. Every dollar she had ever deposited into that account thinking this is for her future had been spent on floral centerpieces and a Maldives honeymoon. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder than that. Something that made me very careful and very deliberate. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The first thing I did was stop acting normal. Not visibly. On the surface, everything stayed exactly the same. I texted my mother about the wedding seating chart. I sent my brother a congratulations message when he posted his engagement photos again on social media. I showed up to the family dinner that Friday, brought dessert, laughed at the right moments. Inside, I was building a case. I had learned something important in my contracts law class the previous semester. Not the specific statutes, those I would need help with. But the general principle: documentation is everything. Evidence speaks when people won't. A paper trail is more convincing than any argument you could ever make in a kitchen or a living room. So I documented everything twice. The bank records, printed, scanned, uploaded to a private cloud folder with two-factor authentication. Then emailed to myself at an address my family didn't know existed. Then saved on a USB drive that I kept in my car, tucked inside the inner lining of a laptop bag. The contract photographs, same process. 3 separate backups across 2 different platforms. I organized them by date, by vendor, by amount. I created a spreadsheet that cross-referenced every withdrawal from my account with a corresponding vendor payment. Clean. Precise. The kind of document that required no interpretation. You looked at it and understood immediately. Then I made a list. Not of things I wanted to say to my parents. Not grievances. A list of the people I would need, in the right order, to make this matter in a way that couldn't be undone. The first call I made was to a lawyer. Not a family friend. Not someone my parents had ever met. I found her through a law school referral service, an elder law and trust litigation attorney with 20 years of experience. Her name was Patricia. Her office was quiet and smelled like old books. She wore reading glasses on a chain and she did not waste words. I laid everything out in front of her. The account history. The withdrawal timeline. The vendor contracts. The spreadsheet. I told her my grandmother had established the trust, that my parents were co-trustees, that I had not been informed of any of the withdrawals, and that the money had been spent entirely on a private family event with no benefit to me as the beneficiary. She looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at me over her glasses and said, "This is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. Potentially criminal, depending on how the trust documents are written." She asked to see the original trust paperwork. I didn't have it. My parents did. She said that was fine. She said we could obtain it another way. The second person I contacted was my grandmother. This time, I didn't keep my voice even. I drove to her house on a Wednesday morning, sat across from her at her kitchen table, and I told her the truth. Slowly. Without dramatics. I showed her the bank statements on my laptop. I showed her the vendor contracts. I showed her the spreadsheet. She didn't speak for a very long time. She was 81 years old and she had grown up without much. She understood money the way people do when they've had to count it carefully their whole lives. She understood what $224,000 meant. She understood what 22 years of contributions meant. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. She said, "I want to see the trust documents." I told her I thought she might. She stood up, went to her own filing cabinet, the one in her bedroom, not the one anyone else knew about, and she pulled out a folder. Inside was her original copy of the trust agreement. The one her attorney had drafted. The one that specified, in clear language, that trust funds were to be used solely for the beneficiary's education, housing, and professional development. That any disbursement for other purposes required written consent from both the grantor and the beneficiary. She had never given written consent. I had never given written consent. Neither of us had even been asked. She sat back down at the table and looked at the document for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said, "I'm calling my attorney today." I nodded. I told her mine was already working on it. Over the next 2 weeks, while my family continued planning the wedding, My mother texting me about bridesmaid dress colors, my father forwarding restaurant suggestions for the rehearsal dinner. Patricia and my grandmother's attorney were quietly coordinating. A demand letter was drafted. Not sent yet. Just drafted, precise and complete, outlining the breach of fiduciary duty, the unauthorized disbursement of trust funds, and the legal remedies being pursued, which included full restitution, potential civil liability, and a referral to the state's Financial Crimes Unit if restitution was not voluntarily initiated within 14 days of receipt. Patricia also contacted the vendors directly, not to disrupt anything, but to obtain their payment records. Every vendor confirmed the source of payment. Every confirmation went into the file. The file was complete. The demand letter was ready. The wedding was 6 days away. My parents were finalizing the seating chart. My mother had just texted me a photo of the centerpieces. My brother posted a countdown on his social media. 12 people had already posted that they couldn't wait. None of them knew what was sitting in a legal office downtown. None of them knew that my grandmother, the woman they were planning to seat at the head table, the woman whose love and discipline and decades of careful saving had paid for every flower in that photo, had already signed documents authorizing her attorney to proceed. My parents thought they had been careful. They thought the timing was perfect. The wedding was almost here. I was almost done with school. By the time I ever discovered the account was empty, it would be too late to stop anything. They had one miscalculation. They forgot that I talked to my grandmother. They forgot that she keeps her own records. They forgot that love, the real kind, doesn't stay silent when it's been used. They were going about their week completely unbothered. Confident. Already picturing themselves at that venue, at those tables, in front of those flowers. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. I know this because Patricia texted me a single word at 9:47 a.m. Delivered. I was sitting in my campus library at the time, reviewing structural load calculations for my final project. I read her message. I set my phone face down on the table. I finished the calculation I was working on. Then I closed my notebook, packed my bag, and walked outside into the quiet morning air. I stood there for a moment. Breathed. Then I went to class. My mother called at 11:15. I didn't answer. My father called at 11:32. Then again at 11:49. My brother texted at noon. The message was long. I could see from the preview that it began with "what is going on" and ended with something I didn't open yet. I had anticipated this part. Patricia had prepared me for it. She had told me clearly, when the letter lands, your phone will ring. Do not answer. Do not respond. Do not engage in any conversation that happens outside of a documented, structured setting. Anything you say informally can be used to muddy what is otherwise a very clean case. So I said nothing. I went to my afternoon lecture. I took notes. I ate lunch alone at a table near a window and watched students move across the courtyard below, unhurried, carrying coffee cups and backpacks, completely unaware that somewhere across the city, my parents were sitting with a legal document that was quietly rearranging their lives. The formal meeting happened 4 days later. Patricia had requested it. Not a courtroom, not yet. A structured sit-down at her office with both parties present. My parents arrived with a family attorney I had never seen before. A man in his 60s who looked like he had handled mostly real estate disputes and wills. He seemed slightly uncomfortable. My grandmother was there. That was the part my parents had not expected. When they walked into the conference room and saw her sitting at the table beside me, something moved across my mother's face. Not guilt, exactly. Something closer to the recognition that the story she had prepared, whatever version she had rehearsed in the 4 days since the letter arrived, was not going to work the way she had planned. My grandmother did not look at them with anger. She looked at them the way someone looks at a thing they once trusted that has since broken. Quietly. With full understanding. Nobody shouted. Nobody cried. Nobody made a speech. That was the part one had been most afraid of, that it would become loud, emotional, the kind of scene that gets reframed later as everyone overreacting. It didn't. Patricia controlled the room without raising her voice. She simply laid out the facts, in order, with documentation attached to every single claim. The withdrawals. The timeline. The vendor contracts. The spreadsheet. The trust language. The absence of any written consent from the grantor or the beneficiary. The confirmation letters from every vendor. All of it, organized into a bound document that sat in front of each person at the table. My parents' attorney reviewed it for a long time without speaking. Then he leaned over and said something quietly to my father. My father's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. My mother looked at the table. They did not admit wrongdoing in that room. People in that position rarely do, not immediately, not with attorneys present. But the math was not disputable. The documents were not disputable. The trust language was not disputable. Patricia outlined the remedies being sought. Full restitution of $224,000 to a newly established account under my sole control. A formal amendment to the trust removing my parents as co-trustees, replaced by my grandmother's attorney. A signed agreement acknowledging the terms of restitution and the repayment timeline. And a clause, carefully worded, that any failure to meet the repayment schedule would result in an immediate referral to the State Financial Crimes Division for investigation of trust fraud. The last part was the one that changed the air in the room. My parents' attorney asked for 2 weeks to respond formally. Patricia said 1 week. He accepted. The wedding happened anyway. 4 days after that meeting, my brother married his fiancée at the venue my parents had purchased with my future. I was not there. I had sent my brother a message the night before, not angry, not accusatory. I told him I loved him. I told him I hoped he would be happy. I told him that what had happened was between me and our parents, and that I held him separately from it. He didn't respond that night. He responded 3 weeks later, in a long message that I read carefully and did not rush to answer. That relationship would take time. I understood that. What I also understood was that the wedding being beautiful, the flowers being arranged correctly, the catering being exactly as planned, none of it changed the documents sitting in Patricia's office. None of it changed the fact that a legal process was now in motion that my parents could not charm or redirect or reframe their way out of. They had spent the money on a single day. A beautiful, expensive, carefully curated single day. And now they owed it back, documented and court enforceable, on a timeline they had not chosen. My grandmother called me the evening after the formal meeting. She didn't call to celebrate. That wasn't her way. She called to ask how I was doing. We talked for almost an hour, about my final project, about what I was planning after graduation, about a trip she was thinking of taking in the spring. Near the end of the call she said, quietly, I put that money there so you could build something. I told her I knew. She said, make sure you do. I told her I would. The restitution agreement was signed 11 days later. My parents liquidated 2 investment accounts and took a loan against the equity of their home. It was not comfortable for them. It was not supposed to be. The money landed in my new account on a Tuesday morning. I received an email notification. I opened it, looked at the number, and closed my phone. I went back to my final project. I graduated the following May. My grandmother was in the front row. She wore a yellow dress and she clapped longer than anyone around her. After the ceremony, we sat together on a bench near the edge of the quad and she held my hand and didn't say much. She didn't need to. I had applied for a position at a mid-sized infrastructure firm 2 months before graduation. They offered me the role 3 weeks after I walked across that stage. I signed the paperwork in my apartment, alone, on a quiet afternoon with the windows open. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't post anything. I just sat with it for a moment, the fact that the future was still there. That it had been threatened, carefully and deliberately, by people who were supposed to protect it. And that it had survived anyway. Not because I had shouted. Not because I had made the confrontation as dramatic as the betrayal deserved. Because I had been still. Because I had watched. Because I had trusted documentation over emotion and patience over reaction. Because my grandmother had kept her own copy of the trust in a filing cabinet in her bedroom for 22 years, just in case. Some people build slowly and quietly, and they teach the people they love to do the same. That night, everything was quiet.